Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome to another episode of Sree's daily global COVID-19 show. My name is Sree Sreenivasan, and I'm the Marshall Loeb Visiting Professor of Digital Innovation at Stony Brook School of Journalism. We're trying to understand three crises in America: the health, financial, and racial inequality crises. Please continue to send us guest ideas and theme suggestions. My email is sree@sree.net, sree@sree.net. This is episode number 104. That means we've been on lockdown in New York for 104 straight days because we've been on the air every single day of the lockdown. We are so grateful to our viewers around the world and to our speakers and to our sponsors. You'll be meeting our guest in just a minute. Ann Nelson is A Nelson A on Twitter, @A Nelson A. Please follow her. She's a professor and author of Shadow Network, Media, Money, and the Secret Hub of the Radical Right. She'll join us in a couple of minutes. First, let me just say hello to everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Please tag a friend. We're live right now on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, and on LinkedIn. On all of these platforms, you can share with your friends and family. Tag someone who would benefit from this conversation. Today, we're talking about what happened on Saturday in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and the after effects of what was largely called a debacle by the Trump campaign and the Trump administration. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about what it means for the future of political gatherings and political rallies. We'll talk about the right-wing media machine with an expert on that topic. We'll also talk about the state of journalism, and we'll also talk about what all of this means for folks who are trying to understand how large gatherings can happen in this fall and summer here in the United States. Thank you so much for joining us from around the world. Tell us where you're watching from. We do our daily global tour where we tell folks and tell our guests where people are watching from. So please get on and comment, and we will be able to bring the comments here. Let's see who's here already. Jonathan Borstein, who watched for 104 straight days. He's watched the show from lockdown on Union Square. He was a special guest on our 100th episode last Friday. Today is episode number 104. Rahadyan's here watching from Center Reach, Long Island. Hi, Rahadyan. Thank you for being here as well. And Vipul's watching from Delhi. We'll continue the tour. Tell us where you're watching from. Please tag a friend. Please hit share. This is a rare daytime edition of this show. We're usually live at 9 p.m. Eastern. If you're watching on the archives, welcome. And you can watch us live every single day. And you can also see all our archives that you can find very easily on youtube.com/Sreenet. youtube.com/Sreenet. Before I bring on our guest, I just want to say thank you to our sponsors who make this possible. First, get involved with Art & Co., the world's largest online art auction, fundraising for COVID-19 victims. artandco.net. artandco.net. Please check this out. The auction ends Saturday. Some of the world's most famous painters are represented, as well as independent and upcoming artists. We are also grateful to Rutgers and the Global Entrepreneurship Experience. Know anyone who has a teenager? Tell them about this terrific virtual teen camp. They'll listen to speakers from Cognizant, Google, Facebook, Angie's List, and they can get 20% off the code SREE. Go to globalentrepreneurshipexperience.org, globalentrepreneurshipexperience.org. Just take a screenshot, take a photo, share it with a friend. We are also brought to you by She's on Call, a new show that debuted 2 weeks ago and is a great new program that I am helping to put together, and our team at Digimentors. This was last week's episode on June 21st. You can find all these shows on She's on Call on Twitter, on Facebook, on YouTube, and it's hosted by two awesome surgeons, Dr. Sujana and Dr. Marina, and they have guest speakers, mostly doctors, participating and answering your questions. The show is called She's on Call. We also want to thank Muckrack Academy for allowing us to bring you Fundamentals of Social Media, a free course now available at mrac.co/social. Fundamentals of Social Media, about a 2-hour Netflix-style course. You take it, you answer questions, and you get a free certificate that you can then put on your LinkedIn and on your resume. mrac.co/social. More than 4,000 people are taking that course, and we're very grateful to Muckrack for sponsoring us and making that course possible. Now, let me bring on our guest. We are very grateful to Ann Nelson for being here. She is going to talk about what happened in Tulsa and what we can learn. She also wrote a very important article that we will show you. The Tulsa rally is the first big beta test of the Trump 2020 app, which knows where you are and who you know. So we'll be talking about all of that with her in just a minute. Please tag your friends and please hit share. And please welcome Ann Nelson. Hi, Ann.
Hi, Sree. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Welcome back to the show. You were a guest on episode number 49, and here we are, episode number 104. I can't do the math, but it's been a while, but thank you for being here. My first question, as I asked you that day, how are you and how's your family through these crises?
We're muddling through, and fortunately, Riverside Park is quite glorious with all of its blossoms, and nature is a great consolation in times like these.
And you're on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, which is where we live. We happen to have moved out for about a week to Fire Island, as you know, right off Long Island, right near New York City, about an hour away. We feel like we've gone from one lockdown to another, except that instead of Riverside Park, we have a beach where we are wearing masks as we're walking around on the beach. So we're just trying to be careful. Thank you all for watching and for being here. Let me ask you, Ann, to tell us a little bit about the context of what happened in Tulsa, about the rally. Talk about that, and then we'll talk about some of the other aspects of it.
It's just fascinating, Sree. Since I published my book, Shadow Network, last year, that book really tries to shine a light on the mechanics of how the radical right took over the Republican Party and helped bring Trump to power. And it turns out that their data platforms and their apps have been a very important part of that effort. So they have been gradually updating their strategies with the times. 2016 was a very important success for them. 2018, they were developing new tweaks on it. And then Brad Parscale, Trump's campaign manager, decided that he was going to update the app to take advantage of the energy of Trump rallies. That was regarded as his strong point going into the 2020 elections. And last November, December, Parscale announced that he was going to have what he called a Death Star of a campaign operation, which would unveil this terrific new app that would take advantage of rallies and the energy of rallies to get lots of downloads. Then the downloads would access contacts on the cell phone directories and just expand the campaign footprint geometrically moving forward into November. Well, the app was developed with the help of a company in Texas called Funware, and it did indeed have some innovations, and it got ready to launch with the rallies, and then Corona hit, and the rallies were canceled. They also wanted to use it in evangelical and fundamentalist churches in swing states. Churches were no longer meeting, and it really caused a problem in the whole campaign strategy. So when the virus hit in March, when it hit truly hard, you might have been paying attention to some headlines where they're saying, oh, well, we should let churches meet and give them an exemption from the rules against meeting. Oh, we should have campaign rallies. Well, let's open things up at Easter. And there was an undercurrent to all of those announcements, which were that the whole mechanics of the upcoming campaign depended on the app interacting with the rallies. So then what happened is that the Trump campaign gave Trump a list of, I think it was half a dozen cities for a possible reopening rally. He chose Tulsa from the list, according to a Vanity Fair piece that came out today. And off they went. Now, you should bear in mind that my home state of Oklahoma has had a lot of resistance to using masks and distancing, a lot. And in fact, in my hometown, the mayor tried to require masks in stores, and somebody came in and threatened the store owner with a gun because it's an open carry state. So they kind of dropped the mask requirement. They advertised the rally in Tulsa very heavily. They promoted on the app. It was supposed to be the big public debut for the Trump 2020 app. So then some interesting things happened. Pascal started boasting on Twitter that he had 800,000, 1 million requests for tickets for this rally in a stadium that held less than 20,000 people. Nobody knew what to do with that, except that requesting tickets also meant that you gave the campaign some of your personal information for their database. And the goal is to assemble as much as possible before November. Then, as we know, the rally took place. Trump flies to Tulsa. There's supposed to be an outdoor rally, but they cancel it because there aren't enough people to hold an outdoor rally without looking pathetic. He goes to the indoor rally, and there's so few people there that he threatens not to speak at all, but they talk him onto the stage. The Tulsa Fire Department reports that in this space that holds 20,000 people, they had an attendance of 6,200. So instead of having this jam-packed, cheering crowd, Trump had to deal with the optics of these vast, empty blue seats. And it was not a good look. His speech was very odd, but he seemed off balance, going off for 15 minutes about how many hands he required to drink a glass of water and what kind of shoes he wore walking on the ramp at West Point. And then he makes this statement about tests for coronavirus. And he says that in as much as if you do more testing, you find more cases, he told his people that he wanted them to slow down the tests. And that has just blown up in their faces because it runs counter to all of the recommendations of public health officials. So Tulsa is being treated as a fiasco, including by local officials in Oklahoma, most of whom are Republican, who begged the campaign to delay the rally. That's the synopsis, and we'll see what comes next in Arizona.
Thank you, Anne. That was masterfully done. Now we understand a little bit better what happened on Saturday. Today is Tuesday. Here is Lou Dobbs, the biggest cheerleader of Mr. Trump, or right up there with Sean Hannity, and he's saying that this was a mess and should heads roll is the question he asks. We should also say that there's speculation that a lot of K-pop fans and others mounted a concerted effort to bomb the not bomb is the wrong word in this context, but to take over the reservation list by asking for bookings and just flooding it. And therefore, that's how they got that million. So basically, they trolled this campaign that's full of trolls in this very kind of brilliant way. And that's why they kept thinking they're getting 1 million people, when in fact there were 6,000 people there.
So there's a very interesting piece that came up on the MIT Tech Review today, and I recommend the MIT publication very highly. It's really great. And it says that, yes, the K-pop kids played a role, but that the news media has somewhat exaggerated it. And that there were a lot of other factors in terms of the million count on the advance tickets. I can say that I've been tracking the various Trump apps for 2 or 3 years now, including the new one. And it was promoting the event and really suggesting that, hey, why don't you just go ahead and request tickets? Because every time you requested tickets, they harvested some of your data. So there was nothing on the Trump 2020 app, which again is fairly new, that said, don't request tickets if you're not going to go. And I have a feeling that there were just an awful lot of people who requested tickets because they could. I mean, there's so many interesting things that are going to gradually come out about the Tulsa rally. One of them is that people in Tulsa are saying that many out-of-state people came, including a large number of people from Texas. So much of this work on the apps and the data collection goes on beneath the surface. And it may be that, you know, the million tickets was not a bad campaign strategy in terms of their data harvesting. They just shouldn't have boasted about it, because then the actual turnout looks pathetic.
That makes sense as they're trying to understand that. Here's the article you mentioned. Let's take a look. So tell us what this article said.
As I mentioned, it says that, yes, the K-pop kids and the TikTok community were also inspired to request tickets, and they did so, but there were various other parties and reasons that people requested tickets. So it's such a great, juicy story for journalists to, you know, think that, oh yeah, the K-pop kids fooled the Trump campaign. Yes, to an extent, but it's a more complicated story. And I think that anybody who's doing really serious reporting on the current campaign needs to dig a little deeper past the headlines. And I know that tech reporting is arduous, because I've been trying to do it myself and swimming through these, you know, permissions and privacy statements in the various apps. But it's really important. And one of the reasons it's important is because there's a lot going on in terms of geolocation functions, where the Trump app in particular, the Trump 2020 app, is looking, you know, getting access to people's location and their contacts, sometimes without their knowledge, sometimes when Bluetooth may be turned off. And collecting this data, and in some cases selling it to third parties. So it's a tricky moment in our political life, because these digital campaign tools are being developed so quickly. And in fact, there's another MIT Tech Review piece about the way that some of them were pioneered by Modi in India and then brought over to the United States, which I think is fascinating. So I don't think people understand how they're being manipulated. Some of these have been pioneered in commercial use, but frankly, I find it a little bit less problematic to have Amazon saying, I might like to buy this pair of shoes, than it is to having the electoral process being manipulated in this way.
I agree. We should really do all we can to pay attention, and journalists especially need to pay attention. So one of the things we're going to do now is to do our daily global tour. If you're joining us, you're watching my daily global conversation around topics about COVID-19 and things happening around it. Today we're talking about Tulsa and the rally there. And as Vandana Menon, one of our producers, said, we're talking about Trump, Tulsa, and TikTok. And I think she was able to get that alliteration in there. And she's one of our two producers. She's Vandana_Menon on Twitter, and also at Rose Horowitz 31. Please follow them. They make it possible for us to do this daily show, 104 straight days of lockdown and 104 straight shows. Let's take a look at who's watching around the world. We told you that Jonathan is watching in New York, and Rahadyan's watching from Center Reach, Long Island. Vipul's in New Delhi. Ellen's watching from New York City. Welcome. Sandro says hello. Amit Kumar is watching from Bangalore. And Rachel Pratt says hi. temporarily relocated to Pennsylvania, usually in Brooklyn. Welcome, Rachel. She's watching on LinkedIn. And I hope, Anne, you had a chance to share on your various platforms the link so that your friends, so if any of your friends show up here, please give them a shout out. Jasper is watching from Utah. Sandra is watching from Palermo. Hello, Sandro. And Rose is watching from Milford, Connecticut, and she's working from home, sitting by her deck today. And Vipul says people in India are shifting to organic remedies to cure corona, and many are saying it works. Do you see organic Ayurveda or Ayurveda can cure COVID instead of costly medicine? So we're not doctors, neither Professor Nelson nor I are doctors, but we want to say to everybody, please don't fall for fake cures, nature cures, other things. There is no cure for coronavirus except getting better in the process of fighting the virus like you do all other viruses. Please follow your doctor's information. Just today, Anne, a leading Indian god man, said he's created a new solution for new medicine that fixes everything, and coronavirus will disappear in 7 days. So the clock has started. We'll see if he's fixed everything in India. We also complain, when you talked about technology, and WhatsApp groups are a major source of disinformation, misinformation, and used by the right in many countries. Not as much here because most Americans are not on WhatsApp. But once that takes off, we'll see it here as well. And I'd like to hear from you in just a moment. Let's just keep going on the tour. Carla says hello from Cape Coral, Florida. And Durga is watching, and Ashok is watching from Kerala, India. And another Sree is watching from Wisconsin. He's an MS, MBA, and a SASM. I don't know what that is, but maybe Srikar can tell us what that is. Swapandeep is watching. Diane's watching. Fascinating discussion about Tulsa rally. Thank you, Diane. And she's tuning in from Margate, Washington. My dad is here. Hi, Acha. Love you. Just great to have you here from Kerala, India. He celebrated Father's Day and his birthday remotely instead of us being there with him. Mina's watching from California, and we have someone else watching from India. Rama's watching from India. Virginia. Well, I doubt it's Virginia Woolf, but or is that her name? I don't know.
Hi, Virginia.
Virginia's watching from Anne's Facebook feed. That's great. And Ram Rahman, great friend, watching, photographer, activist, great guy, former New Yorker, watching from New Delhi. And we are just glad to have everybody here, watching from Stillwater, Oklahoma.
Okay.
Christina Gonzalez is watching.
Christina, hey.
So tell us a little bit about the context for Tulsa also. I know you said he picked it from a list, but we also need to acknowledge, as we have on this show multiple times, that Tulsa is not just another southern city or anything like that. Tulsa is the home in 1921 of one of the richest African-American communities, maybe the richest on average African-American community in a section of Tulsa known as Black Wall Street, and a mob descended on it and massacred hundreds of people and razed it to the ground. A terrible story that's described in great pain and in great detail in the book by Shamari Wills called Black Fortunes, about the first 6 African Americans who escaped slavery and became millionaires. He was on this show just a few weeks ago, and he was brilliant in explaining what that was all about. And I encourage you all to please take a look at his book called Black Fortunes. It's episode 86. You can find it on our archives. Just go to youtube.com/SreeNet, episode 86. This is episode number 104. And that's just one example of one of the reasons. And by the way, Trump also picked Juneteenth to do it. And so we believe there are no coincidences when it comes to President Trump, just as there weren't when President Reagan picked a particular place to go and launch his campaign back in 1980. So let's get a little bit more context about Oklahoma. Yeah. You're from there. What town are you from? Yeah. And what are we getting wrong about Oklahoma? What do we not know about Oklahoma that we should?
Yeah, I think that you shouldn't discount the possibility of ignorance in the Trump campaign. And it could be that they just set the date and then he went to the list of cities and that occurred. I don't know.
You're more generous than I am.
I try to be. Oh, I try to be. But Oklahoma has a fascinating history, and every high school student is required to take Oklahoma history. I can tell you that in my case, and in the case of everyone I know who grew up there, the Greenwood massacre, it was not mentioned. It was not in the history books, and it was such a major event in U.S. history, not just American history. But you need a little background, which is that Oklahoma was not a state at the time of the Civil War. It was known as Indian Territory and Oklahoma Territory, where Native Americans were forcibly relocated when their lands were taken away from them. And after the Civil War, it was gradually in stages opened for non-Native American settlement, where the treaties with the Native Americans were once again violated and displaced. And the state was given over to these other settlers. And a lot of them were people who had been displaced by the Civil War. Not all of them from the South, but many of them from the South. So for example, Tulsa and other cities in Oklahoma had a long history of the Ku Klux Klan. And in fact, even up to the present day, there's an employee for the Tulsa County, a government employee who's an admitted member of the Ku Klux Klan. And the state is maintaining that that's a question of freedom of expression. Well, you also had displaced people moving in from the plantations and African Americans who had been slaves who were looking to start over. From various areas. So you already in the early days of Oklahoma have this possible tension. And the state, it became a state in 1907. The African Americans in Tulsa began to profit from the economic development of the state, and Black Wall Street grew up in this area called Greenwood. And the Tulsa massacre occurred on a very flimsy excuse that a young African American had somehow insulted or possibly assaulted a woman in an elevator. The details are not known, whether it even actually happened. Rather than being an angry mob attacking Greenwood, it was a coordinated government response that involved city officials at high levels and an aerial bombardment. So that would not have been elements that were available to simply an angry, rampaging mob. It was a great tragedy, and it was not only erased from history. Oklahoma forensic anthropologists are still working on finding the mass graves of the people who were murdered, and murdered in many cases under horrific, horrific circumstances. You're dealing with a time in the 1920s and the 1930s when lynching was commonplace in many southern states without any legal retribution. So it's a part of our history. It's a terrible part. And one thing I talk about in Shadow Network is that these injustices have not been overcome. There are many economically disadvantaged African Americans in Oklahoma and beyond who've never had a fair shake getting access to good education. They've never had a fair access to good jobs. And there are areas where they live in poverty with terrible public health conditions. I should add that Oklahoma is second lowest in the entire nation in terms of the percentage of population that has health insurance. And obviously, the poor and many African Americans fit into that category. So we really have a long legacy to overcome. And I'm afraid that the people involved in the radical right of the Republican Party are intent on maintaining these economic and systemic injustices. I mean, that's part of their whole platform, even though they may dress it up in more modern language.
And where do you think that this now goes in terms of the, how do we build on what our knowledge of what's happened in Oklahoma and how do we all learn more about it? Your description of a government response is particularly scary, I think, for us to understand that piece of history, not even taught in Oklahoma. Is that something that's going to change now, do you think? Do you sense that?
I'm sure it will change. And I think I'm certainly haven't gone to high school recently, so I don't know whether it's already changed. But if you think about it, you have a lot of voters of various age groups who didn't have this as part of their formation, who don't really think in these terms. And so, for example, I started school in Stillwater, Oklahoma, in segregated schools. My schools were segregated. And so you already have this gap in just having these communities know each other and be a part of each other's lives. And I wish I could say that problem has been fully overcome in the ensuing years, but let's face it, a lot of the United States is de facto segregated, maybe not by law, but by practice. And I feel that if there's one takeaway from my book, Shadow Network, it's just that we have to get to know each other better and find our common ground. Who wants toxic waste dumps in their town? Who wants contaminated drinking water? We have to work together on these issues and not allow the corporations and the oil companies to define our environment.
I completely agree that that's how it should be, but we know from so much reporting and research that there are vast groups of people in America who've been told that those are not problems, those are not real issues, and even in their own communities don't push back when these things happen because they're told that what's good for these corporations is good for them. Let's see who else is watching. Vinay is watching from Delhi. Hi, Vinay. Vinay is senior Indian journalist. Chanika is watching from Mumbai. And Itala says, good to see you from Tirupati. We have David Beard just finished watching Watchmen last night. Thanks, Christina, for joining Sree today. Tell us about have you seen The Watchmen?
I haven't seen it yet.
But there's a lot of noise about it, right? A lot of people talking about it.
It's on my list. And I find it really ironic for my entire adult life that when people find out I'm from Oklahoma, they immediately burst into song. Oklahoma, right? And
What is
the irony there.
I've never seen Oklahoma, the musical. What is that? What is the story? What is that story?
Well, you really must.
Yes.
The irony is that it was originally written as a play by an Oklahoman who was part Native American, who came to New York and had a play produced called Green Grow the Lilacs. And when Rodgers and Hammerstein were looking for a property to adapt as a musical, they chose this. And of course, Rodgers and Hammerstein were two New York guys who were Columbia graduates who'd never been anywhere near Oklahoma. And it's so interesting to me that you had this Oklahoma around statehood where you had this kind of combustible situation with Klansmen and former slaves and dirt poor farmers. And what Rodgers and Hammerstein did was turn it all into a lily white Viennese operetta. And it's a gorgeous piece of work. I love the musical Oklahoma. It's just unfortunate that people think it really represented Oklahoma at the time.
And here we are. Let's see who else is watching. David says the first statewide health plan came in Oklahoma? ?
I'm not sure what he means, so I don't know.
Rita's watching from New Delhi. So Fabio says, when the country was sold out in 1871, so were individuals' rights, which is why the state owns everything legally, including you. The country really is just run by an oligarchy, is what he says. Fabio says that. Vipul says, you mentioned Modi, and yes, you were right. He introduced digital rally concept. It's big in India, and it's surprising as people are tuning in to see Modi. Now Trump is also using the same.
I would love to see a lot more reporting on how it's being used in India and how it's playing out. So thank you for that.
Harold says, great book, and horrific events have happened in Tulsa now and then. Sri Parna says, watching from West Bengal. Julie Triedman's watching, says, hi, Anne.
Hi, Julie.
And so many comments coming in so quickly. John says, Donald Trump plays politics with people's emotions and religion, black and white, and armed forces. And Fabio says, the state platform is outdated and rigged for the ruling class. You're just tax-paying peasants. Vote harder, he says. And vote more often. What do they say? Vote early and often.
Yeah, right.
Mina says she's absolutely right about government response to the mob attack, and far-right Republicans are still wanting to hold on to that. John says, I think Barack Obama is far better. Vandana says, a lot of the U.S. is de facto segregated, maybe not by law, but by practice, quoting you, Anne. And Harold says, great to see Professor Ann Nelson's greetings from Maryland. So, David says that musical plays a part in 2 plot twists in Watchmen. So as we were just talking about that. And let's see who else is here. Rahadian says, in an opposite episode of Watchmen, there is all-black production of Oklahoma. Oh, wow. So maybe, Anne, you and I need to watch this.
Absolutely.
And John is saying thank you to Scroll, which it makes it possible for us to have this large audience all over the world, especially in India. You're awesome. I request you please make full videos, okay? Neeraj is watching from Mumbai, and others are watching as well. We're just really grateful to everyone who's been able to join us today to share their opinions. We are talking right now to Ann Nelson, whose book is called Shadow Network. Let's talk a little bit about the book itself. The media, money, and the secret hub of the radical right. Please talk about it.
Well, what I found was, I should preface it by saying that I began my career doing war reporting from El Salvador and Guatemala. And then I was in my 20s, and I turned that into a lifelong study of how censorship works, how authoritarian governments can be advanced. And my last 2 books were about anti-Nazi resistance movements in Berlin and Paris. So this is when I turned my research back on my own country, and in fact, my own state in some cases. What I found was that in the 1960s, the Supreme Court advanced the political and civil rights of African Americans and women and others in American society. There were religious interests of fundamentalists in the South who pushed back. Basically because they had segregation academies, as they were called, and they had a whole profit model, a whole revenue stream from having segregated schools, and they wanted to enshrine their rights to segregation. And they founded something called the Council for National Policy, which brought together big donors, like the DeVos family in Michigan, and like some of the oil barons of Texas, and political strategists, and then some media operations, especially fundamentalist radio and fundamentalist television broadcasting. And Sree, as you know, if you're teaching in a standard journalism school in the United States, there's not a lot of talk about the Christian Broadcasting Network or Salem Media, these fundamentalist broadcasters. They're not really on the radar, but they are very powerful in various parts of the country, with over 100 million people in this audience, and they become political platforms de facto over this time, working in concert with the political strategists and the big donors from this organization. So they spent 40 years studying the American political system and figuring out how to exploit its weaknesses. And most of what they've done is actually perfectly legal. And in many cases, the Democrats, I think, were just asleep at the wheel and have allowed them to advance in some areas, including the political campaign tools, the digital campaign tools, and target swing states that Democrats have often ignored. And in 2016, the prime example was Wisconsin, where the Democrats didn't even really facilitate serious campaigning in Wisconsin. And these other organizations worked it over for the Republicans for 20 years. So that's the premise of the book. And since I published it last fall, I've been gradually updating it as I get more research in hand. So I just published a piece in the Daily Beast 2 days ago about the new Trump 2020 app and the Tulsa rally and how that's being used. And I'm just trying to inform citizens about what's going on under their noses. It's been tricky because this November election is hugely important. It is going to define so much of the future of our nation. And yet we've had this crazy news cycle where, you know, you had the impeachment, you had the coronavirus, you have all of these other elements that come in and take over political coverage when it should be, in normal times, a period where people are really doing a deep dive into the electoral campaign and what's shaping up for November. So I feel like I'm kind of swimming against the current here. But my feeling is that November determines whether we have more erosion of the rule of law or more legal principles restored to our society, whether we have a public health policy or whether we have this chaos that we've been living under. So I'm just trying to stay very focused.
And where do you see this go from now in terms of Fox and its role in all of this?
Well, Fox is so fascinating. And I don't have a lot of inside information about Fox, but I've made some observations. I feel that Fox is moving more towards the center. And for example, I watched the Tulsa rally on Fox and I saw the prelude to it and it was perfect. I found it to be perfectly reasonable coverage. There's another hidden secret of Fox, which is I believe they have one of the best political polling operations in the business. And I believe that it is run in a very rigorous way by someone who is incredibly expert and reads the numbers in a neutral fashion. So this has come to the attention of Donald Trump too, because he's been very angry at Fox recently. And he's been specifically angry at their polling operation because it doesn't tell him what he wants to hear. But for anybody who follows politics closely, I would strongly recommend that you suspend your preconceptions about Fox. And I'm not talking about specific individuals like Hannity and talk shows. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about their news coverage. And I'm specifically really highly recommending their political polling. I can say that at the midterms, I was in Dallas covering the Ted Cruz campaign. And I was in his victory party. And they had the screen up, you know, the big screen up reporting the returns. And Fox was, of course, the network of choice for this party. And Fox was the first one to call the House of Representatives for the Democrats, calling it the way they saw it. And there was just audible consternation in the room because it was as though the Cruz supporters felt they had been personally betrayed by Fox News.
By hearing the truth. And that's one of the things that I've been saying since this coronavirus issue started, that when the history books are written, they're going to go back and see how Fox News in particular went out of its way to enable the Trump narrative that this will all go away, it's a hoax, it's not real, and now here we are 100,000 dead people later. I'm willing to grant you that their news operation is much better than their talk show stuff, especially Hannity and folks like that. But this is also the Fox News unit that made Seattle seem like it's on fire when. Yeah. So they at the heart of it, they under their ownership have been directed to, you know, just the way that you remember during the entire Obama presidency, everything was a scandal. One day he wore a tan suit, that was a scandal. One day he had a Marine hold an umbrella, that was a scandal. Like, that's the way the Fox News works now compared to OAN, which is now Trump's favorite channel. Fox looks like MSNBC, but at the heart of it, there is still a kind of Trumpism that's there that we shouldn't forget. Let's keep seeing the comments coming in. People are talking. Cindy says, "Hi Anne, great show," and other folks are commenting as well. Stefan says, "Thank you for sharing your insight," and Whipple says, "Trump speaks or tweets fake news. Do you think if Twitter fact checked him, it also is bad as the case of the online platform can narrate the version and not the truth?" Interesting question. So you know that Facebook and Twitter have started in some ways fact checking Trump, but that's a lot of power going to these companies. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's an improvement, and I want to have a caveat. What I said about Fox is not a ringing endorsement, and when I say it's better than it was, that's something of a low bar. But in my reporting, I really do try to keep looking at things with fresh eyes. It's hard because you have an image of something, but it's important to keep checking back. And the political winds have turned into a hurricane, and I see signs that there were Trump supporters who are, I'm not going to say rats deserting a sinking ship. I wouldn't say that. But that they would feel that it's not in their interest to remain Trump loyalists at the moment. The other thing is, I was fascinated by the TV program Succession. I think it's so interesting. And it's about a media family and the generational gap. And there's been a lot of reporting about how Rupert Murdoch has his approach. He built it out with Roger Ailes. Well, now there's a new generation moving into the picture, and they're going to have some more modern concepts. And I think that it's important to remain open to seeing changes as the winds shift. Maybe they'll go back to being hyper partisan conservative. Maybe I just saw, some unusual programming, but I think it's good to just keep refreshing one's reporting with actuality. In terms of Twitter and Facebook correcting Trump, I think it's super important. I think that social media platforms have been very problematic in our political life. And when Jack Dorsey at Twitter said, "All right, enough is enough. We can't just let him use it as a platform to advance his cause when he's telling things that aren't true and when he's inciting violence." So in that way, I think Twitter has been an industry leader in that respect. Facebook seems to be haltingly coming along in the rear. I can't tell where they're going on it, but I've seen them remove some content that was political and problematic, and they seem to be getting a little bit more serious about it. But I wouldn't place any bets on what Mark Zuckerberg will do tomorrow. But again, going back to my other books, I was fascinated that Joseph Goebbels in the 1930s hated the Berlin newspapers because they reported on Hitler's speeches and they fact-checked them and they critiqued them. And at that time, radio was a new technology and the intellectuals looked down on it. But Goebbels said, "Oh, if I put Hitler on the radio, he can go straight to the people without any fact-checking, without any curation." And so there's just many precedents for Donald Trump's use of Twitter. And what we still have for the moment is the ability to have media platforms intervene and try to save some semblance of factual reporting. And that just needs to be expanded.
Sure. We've got lots of comments coming in. Rose says, "Succession, yes, a great show, Shakespearean and plot and characters, I think." And Naresh Fernandez is watching. Delighted to see two of my old professors here. Naresh is the founding editor and editor-in-chief of Scroll.in, one of India's best news, culture, and analysis websites. Anybody who wants to understand India should be reading Scroll.in, along with other publications. And Scroll is in partnership with us on this show, and we're able to reach so many people around the world thanks to them. Lots of other comments coming in here. David says, "It would be great if Frank Rich, who executive produces Succession, would show up for an episode." He's a famous journalist. And I believe he was instrumental in getting HBO to offer Watchmen for free last weekend. So there's so many people who care about the Watchmen and think that it's, informative for our times. Here's a piece of fiction that is informative for our times. And David says, so if Twitter and Facebook are 2020 versions of non-fact-checking radio of the 1930s, says David. And David, by the way, who runs newsletters at National Geographic, was our guest a couple of weeks ago and was as fantastic in trying to help us understand how newsletters work, how we can all use the elements of newsletter journalism today to make all our content better. So go back, you will learn a lot. Anyone who's interested in newsletters and how to communicate. David's one of the great Twitter writers also of our time and a great newsletter writer as well. So please follow him. He's at @DaBeard on Twitter. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say that the point to Goebbels is that he took control of the radio in Germany, took absolute control and placed it under his Ministry of Propaganda and Public Enlightenment. And so nobody had the capability that our social media platforms have to do the fact checking that Twitter has instituted. So we still have some instruments of democracy at our disposal, and it's really important to use them.
Yeah, and this is also, we were talking earlier about WhatsApp and other things as well. As we come to an end here, we know that we're going to be covering on this show more politics as we go into the next few months. And so what are some things that Ann Nelson, the political expert, the journalist, is going to be watching for to get a sense of whether Trump is going to win and what's going to happen with the Senate? We should point out that no one's good at predicting, considering what happened in 2016. Though 2018, there were signs early that Trump and his party would lose. So tell us, what are the signs that you're looking for, please?
Sure. Well, you should bear in mind that the reason Trump chose Tulsa, I believe, is because Oklahoma is a very, very red state. And so he had every reason to think that he would have unalloyed support there. It's very interesting to see that today he is in Arizona, and not coincidentally, he's speaking at a megachurch. And Arizona is one of the 6 swing states that everybody has to focus on. I would say, please don't focus on national polls, because within our very flawed electoral system, they are basically irrelevant. And Hillary Clinton won the popular vote by 3 million. She lost the Electoral College by fewer than 100,000 votes in 3 states, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Those 3 states are still in play today. The other 3 states that are critical to watch are North Carolina, Florida, and Arizona, where Mr. Trump finds himself today. So watching, we're watching Biden build a sizable margin in terms of the national vote, but with a lot of the polls, these 6 swing states, the margin can be razor thin, and it can be tilted by all kinds of things. And you have to remember that a lot of the people in these states, especially the older white population that vote at a rate of like 91%, will be focused on media from fundamentalist broadcasting and other areas where they're just not getting the same news diet that we're getting elsewhere. And things are being played and skewed in all kinds of ways. So, for example, when they hear the phrase "abolish the police," what they're being shown is rioting and violence. Some of it file footage that's not even from the current period in history, and they're being exposed to a lot of scare tactics. There's this whole mythology that's being generated about how a group supposedly known as Antifa has organized national, I don't know what, and that's being blown up into a national boogeyman that's being promoted in these areas. So I think that finding ways to get real journalism, fact-based, science-backed information to these parts of the country is absolutely critical. And the other thing is remembering that high-touch canvassing and campaigning is the most effective. It's terribly complicated in the age of coronavirus. I don't know how door-to-door canvassing can work, but I do know that if one party manages to deploy it to highly targeted populations in swing states and the other party doesn't, then that's going to be another disadvantage. The numbers I'm seeing show that Biden could win by as many as 5 to 10 million votes in the popular vote and still lose the Electoral College. So if you want to follow this closely, I highly recommend the University of Virginia's Center for Politics polling analysis produced by Larry Sabato, and you can Google it as University of Virginia Crystal Ball. They have weekly updates that really orient you as to what's really going on in these races.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you for your time. I hope you'll come back. You were a guest on episode 49, and here we are, episode number 104. Congrats again on your book and your article that everyone should read about the Trump 2020 app and the various things that has up its sleeve. So thank you very much, everybody. Please follow Anne. She's at @ANelsonA on Twitter. Anne Nelson, thank you very much, and we'll see you again. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Sree. Bye.
Bye. We're very grateful to Anne Nelson for being here, and grateful to all of you for being here with us for episode number 104. Please tag a friend, share with a friend now. As soon as we go off the air, it'll replay on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, and on LinkedIn. We are so glad that you were able to join us for even part of this. Our next episode will be 9 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday. Most of our shows are at 9 p.m. Eastern, but occasionally we have daytime shows, as we did last week when we had the chief scientist of WHO and the head of pandemics and epidemics at WHO at noon, episode 99. Please go find it. Please watch it. youtube.com/SreeNet for our entire archive. Let's go in here and look at a couple of the comments that are coming in. Ram says, great show. Thank you. Mark popped in from North Carolina. Rose is quoting Anne. Dubbeard, at Dubbeard, David Beard says, thanks, Anne and Sree. Jonathan says, fascinating show. Have to sign out to log out to a doctor's appointment. Shall be back tomorrow, which will complete the 15th week, or roughly 3.5 months. I cannot believe it, Jonathan. Thank you for all your support, watching every single episode. We are very grateful. Rose continues to live tweet, and everybody should follow her and Vandana as well. Ellen says, interesting. Thank you very much. Once again, we want to thank our sponsors for making this possible. But before we go, I want to say their names. We have said on multiple occasions that we will say their names on this show, as we've been doing. Before that, let's just thank our sponsors. We want to thank Rutgers Global Entrepreneurship Experience. Please follow them, and please take a look at what they're doing. globalentrepreneurshipexperience.org. It's a virtual teen camp that you will want to tell your kids or teens in your life. Art & Co., the world's largest online art auction. Don't miss this. COVID-19 victims, fundraising for them, artandco.net. And also, we are telling everybody about the Muckrack course that I'm offering, Fundamentals of Social Media. It's a free certification course that you can take right now with 4,000 other people, mrac.co/social, mrac.co/social. We have been doing on this show every single episode for the last couple of weeks, saying their names, and we're saying them through this Time magazine cover that you have seen by Titus Kaffer. And it's a stunning painting, but even more stunning when you look on the right and see this photograph of a young George Floyd and his mother, Larsenia. And he would die 2 years almost to the day and be buried next to her just this year, as you know, in Minneapolis, but he was buried in Houston. And the names are Trayvon Martin, Yvette Smith, Eric Garner, Michael Brown, Laquan McDonald, Tanisha Anderson, Akai Gurley, Tamir Rice, Jerame Reed, Natasha McKenna, Eric Harris, Walter Scott, Freddie Gray, William Chapman, Sandra Bland, Darius Stewart, Samuel Dubose, Janet Wilson, Kaylin Rockmore, Alton Sterling, Philando Castile, Joseph Mann, Terrence Crutcher, Chad Robertson, Jordan Edwards, Aaron Bailey, Stefan Clark, Danny Ray Thomas, Antoine Rose, Botham Jean, Tatiana Jefferson, Michael Dean, Ahmad Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd. And to that list, we must add names like Rayshard Brooks, who was killed in Atlanta a couple of weeks ago. And we also need to add to that list, as we learned yesterday on this on our special episode with Ryan Boodoo, we have to add the name of his brother, Ravi Boodoo, who in 2008 was killed in police custody. And he believes that his brother was a victim of police violence. You can read Ryan's USA Today op-ed at bit.ly/Ryan op-ed, or just go into our archives, episode number 103 yesterday, to see this special and very disturbing episode. With that, we'll say goodbye. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. We're very grateful to you. Sree even caught me off guard on this one. Got to watch him 3 times. He says, yeah, we keep changing the time on occasion. If we had more sponsors, we'd be able to pick a time and stick to it. So we will do that. Thank you very much, everybody. And please email us with comments and questions. Sree at Sree